AITA for refusing to give my sister my house after she announced her pregnancy at my wedding. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to post on Reddit, but after what happened last week, half my family isn't speaking to me, and the other half is calling me heartless. I need outside opinions because right now, I feel like I'm losing my grip on what's reasonable. For context, I'm 31. I work as a project manager for a construction firm, and I bought my house 3 years ago after saving aggressively for almost a decade. No inheritance, no handouts. I worked weekends, skipped vacations, lived with roommates into my late 20s. The house isn't huge, but it's mine. 2 bedrooms, small backyard, quiet neighborhood. It's my safe place. My younger sister Kayla has always lived differently. She's charismatic, impulsive, and somehow always lands on her feet no matter how reckless her choices are. Our parents have helped her a lot over the years. Rent money here, credit card bills there. I love her, but we've never been similar people. Last Saturday was my wedding. It was a small ceremony at a lakeside venue about an hour outside the city. 60 guests. Outdoor seating, string lights, simple but beautiful. My husband Mark and I paid for most of it ourselves. My parents contributed a little, but we didn't ask for much. It was honestly the happiest day of my life, until the reception. During dinner, my maid of honor clinked her glass for a toast. She gave a sweet speech. Everyone laughed, a few people cried. Then before the next toast could start, Kayla stood up. I remember thinking she was just going to say something cute or embarrassing from our childhood. That's when she placed her hand on her stomach and said loudly, "Well, since we're all celebrating love and family tonight, I think this is the perfect moment to share some news." The room went quiet. She smiled and said, "I'm pregnant." People gasped. Someone clapped. My mom immediately started crying. My dad stood up to hug her. The attention in the room shifted instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. Guests started coming over to her table, congratulating her, asking questions. I just sat there, frozen, my fork still in my hand. I want to be very clear. I don't hate my sister. I don't hate babies, but this was my wedding. She didn't ask me beforehand. She didn't even hint at it. She just took the moment. Mark squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "We'll talk about it later." I nodded, trying not to cry in front of everyone. I told myself to let it go. One bad moment didn't have to ruin the day. I was wrong. After the cake cutting, my parents pulled me aside near the bar. My mom was glowing, still emotional. She hugged me and said, "This is such a special night. Double blessings." Then my dad cleared his throat and said, "We need to talk about something important." At my wedding, on the dance floor, while my song was playing in the background, he told me that Kayla had been struggling financially. Her boyfriend, yes, boyfriend, not husband, was between jobs. They were living in a 1-bedroom apartment with rising rent. With a baby on the way, things were going to be tight. Then my mom said, "You have that house, 2 bedrooms, and a yard. It would be perfect for a baby." I laughed because I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. My dad said, "We think it would be fair if you let Kayla move into your house for a while. You and Mark can stay in his apartment or rent something smaller. You don't need the space right now." I stared at them. My mouth actually fell open. I asked if they were serious. My mom said, "You're stable, you have good jobs. Kayla needs help." I said, "You want me to give my sister my house?" She corrected me quickly. "Not give, just let her live there. Temporarily." I asked how long temporarily was. They didn't answer. I looked over and saw Kayla watching us from across the room, smiling, rubbing her stomach, surrounded by relatives. That's when something inside me snapped. I told my parents no. Calmly, clearly, no. My mom's face fell instantly. My dad's tone changed. He said I was being selfish. That family helps family. That Kayla was vulnerable now. That I could afford to be generous. I told them this conversation was inappropriate and that we would discuss it another time. But the damage was already done. The rest of the night felt off. I noticed whispers, side glances. My aunt avoided me. My cousin congratulated Kayla again and then gave me a tight smile. By the time Mark and I left, I was exhausted, angry, and hurt in ways I didn't even know how to name. The next morning, I woke up to missed calls and messages. Kayla texted me first. She wrote, "I thought you'd be happy for me. I didn't expect you to make things difficult." Then my mom sent a long message about compassion and sacrifice. Then my dad wrote, "I raised you better than this." It's been 6 days. The story has already been twisted. According to some relatives, I refuse to help a pregnant woman. According to others, I care more about property than family. Mark supports me completely, but even he's shocked by how fast things escalated. So here I am, sitting in the house I worked my whole life for, wondering how saying no turned me into the villain. AITA, the fallout didn't slow down after that. If anything, it picked up speed. 2 days after the wedding, Kayla showed up at my house unannounced. I was working from home when I heard knocking, sharp, impatient. When I opened the door and saw her standing there with her arms crossed, belly barely noticeable but very deliberately pushed forward, my stomach dropped. She walked past me without waiting for an invitation. "So," she said, "mind looking around my living room like she was inspecting a rental listing? This is where my kid was supposed to grow up." I shut the door slowly and told her that wasn't happening. She laughed like I'd said something silly. "You're really going to die on this hill?" I asked her why she thought announcing her pregnancy at my wedding was appropriate. Her smile vanished instantly. "Oh my God, you're still on that? People were happy for me. You don't own happiness." I told her it wasn't about happiness. It was about respect. She rolled her eyes and sat down on my couch. My couch. The one I'd spent weeks choosing. "You've always been like this," she said. "You plan everything. You control everything. God forbid something spontaneous happens." I reminded her that spontaneity is different from hijacking someone's once-in-a-lifetime moment. That's when she dropped her bomb. She said our parents had already promised her the house. I felt my chest tighten. I asked her what she meant. She told me that the night before the wedding, she'd cried to Mom about being scared and unstable and not knowing how she'd raise a baby in that tiny apartment. According to Kayla, my mom told her, "Don't worry, your sister has a house. We'll figure something out." I told her they didn't have the authority to promise something that wasn't theirs. Kayla stood up and finally looked angry. "You don't even need it. You're married now, dual income. You could upgrade any time. This is my chance to actually feel secure." I asked her where her boyfriend was in all of this. She hesitated, just for a second. Then she said, "He's trying." That answer told me everything. I told her no again, firmly. I said she couldn't move in, and she definitely couldn't take over my house. She started crying, loudly, dramatically, the kind of crying that demands an audience. You're punishing me for being pregnant, she sobbed. You're jealous because people were excited for me. I told her to leave. She did, but not before saying, when Mom and Dad hear about this, they're going to be devastated. As if they weren't already deeply involved. That night, my parents came over. They didn't ask, they told. My dad said we needed to sit down as a family. My mom kept rubbing her temples like she was the victim of a headache rather than the cause of the chaos. They laid out a plan. Kayla would move into my house within the month. Mark and I would move into his apartment temporarily. We would revisit the arrangement after the baby was born. When I asked who would pay the mortgage, my dad said, you will. It's your house. I asked who would pay utilities, repairs, taxes. My mom said, these details don't matter right now. They matter to me. I told them no, again. That's when my dad raised his voice for the first time in my adult life. He said I was choosing money over blood, that someday I might need help too, and I'd remember this moment. I told him I'd never ask them to fund my life choices. My mom started crying then, real tears. She said she couldn't believe she raised such a cold daughter. She said Kayla was fragile, that pregnancy hormones were overwhelming, that stress could hurt the baby. I said something I probably shouldn't have, but it was true. I said Kayla's pregnancy didn't erase years of irresponsibility. The room went dead silent. My dad told me to apologize. I didn't. They left furious. The next day, screenshots started circulating in the family group chat. Kayla had posted a vague Facebook status about finding out who really loves you when you're at your most vulnerable. Comments poured in. Heart emojis. You're so strong. Babies reveal true colors. Someone tagged me. I muted the chat. Then my aunt called and asked if it was true that I'd kicked a pregnant woman out onto the street. I hadn't even let her move in. At this point, Mark suggested we take a break from communication entirely. Block numbers. Protect our peace. But it's hard to do that when your parents live 15 minutes away and your sister knows exactly which emotional buttons to push. 3 days later, my mom showed up again, alone this time. She looked tired, smaller. She said she just wanted to talk. I let her in. She apologized for yelling, for the pressure. Then she said something that changed everything. She said, if you won't give Kayla the house, at least put it in her name temporarily. That way she feels secure. I asked her if she understood what she was asking. She said, it's just paperwork. I realized then that this wasn't about housing. This was about entitlement. I told her absolutely not, that the answer was final, that if they continued pushing, I would limit contact. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. She left without another word. Yesterday, I found out Kayla is telling people I disowned her. My wedding photos are barely a week old. My marriage just started. And instead of settling into newlywed life, I'm fielding accusations and ultimatums. I keep replaying everything in my head, every word. I am every moment, trying to see where I went wrong. And I still don't see it. So here I am again, asking strangers because my own family refuses to hear me. Am I really the asshole for protecting the one thing I built on my own? I thought things couldn't get worse after that conversation with my mom. I was wrong. The next escalation didn't come from my parents or Kayla. It came from someone I didn't expect at all. Mark's mother. She called me one afternoon while I was driving home from work. I almost didn't answer because I'd been emotionally drained all week, but I figured it might be wedding related. Thank you notes, leftover decorations, something normal. Her voice was careful, too careful. She said she'd heard about the situation and wanted to make sure I was okay. That's when my heart sank. Yen, because that meant the story had already traveled beyond my side of the family. I asked her what she'd heard. She hesitated, then said Kayla had reached out to her directly. Told her she was pregnant, stressed, and worried about family conflict. Apparently, she'd framed it as a misunderstanding. Said I was struggling with the idea of sharing and that my parents were just trying to keep the peace. Mark's mom didn't accuse me of anything, but she did say something that stuck with me. She said, sometimes compromise keeps families together. After I hung up, I sat in my car for 10 minutes before going inside. That night, Mark and I had our first real argument as a married couple. Not a screaming match, but something heavier. He told me he was 100% on my side, but he was worried about how far this was going. He asked if there was any scenario, any at all, where I'd consider letting Kayla stay short-term. Strict lease, clear boundaries. I snapped. I asked him why it was always my responsibility to fix her messes. He said it wasn't, but that we were married now, and everything affected both of us. That scared me more than the family drama. I didn't want resentment to creep into my marriage because of my sister's choices. The next day, I did something I'd been avoiding. I met Kayla's boyfriend, Eric. We'd met before, but barely. He's quiet, polite, always looks slightly overwhelmed. He asked if we could talk, just the two of us. Said he wanted to clear the air. We met at a coffee shop near his apartment. He looked exhausted, dark circles, hands shaking as he held his cup. He apologized first, said he never wanted to cause problems. Said Kayla was under a lot of stress and that things had spiraled. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. He said they'd already given notice on their apartment. I asked him what he meant. He said they'd assumed my parents had things handled. That after the wedding, Kayla told him, we're moving into my sister's place. I asked him if anyone had confirmed that with me. He looked genuinely confused. No, he said. But your parents sounded sure. That's when it hit me. They weren't asking me anymore. They were planning around me. I told Eric plainly that Kayla would not be moving into my house, that no one had my permission to promise it, that if they were giving up their apartment, they needed to make other arrangements immediately. He looked sick. He said Kayla would lose it if she heard that. And I said that wasn't my problem, but my voice cracked when I said it. That night, Kayla called me 27 times. I didn't answer. She left voicemails. Some were sobbing apologies, others were furious accusations. One accused me of ruining her child's future. At 2 a.m., she sent a message that chilled me. She said, if you don't help me, I'll tell people what you're really like. I still don't know what that was supposed to mean. The next morning, my dad showed up at my work, not the parking lot, my office. He asked the receptionist for me by name. I was mortified. He pulled me into a conference room and said Kayla was unstable, that she hadn't slept, that stress was dangerous, that Eric was panicking, that this had gone too far. I told him he was the one who let it go too far. He asked me, point blank, if I wanted to be responsible for whatever happened next. That felt like a threat. I told him to leave. Told him if he ever showed up at my workplace again, I'd involve HR. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. That night, Mark and I talked for hours. We talked about boundaries, about children, about how much involvement we wanted from my family and our future. I cried harder than I had since the wedding. I admitted something I'd never said out loud, that growing up, Kayla was always the crisis, and I was always the solution, the responsible one, the flexible one, the one expected to bend. Mark said something simple that changed everything. He said, being generous doesn't mean being disposable. The next day, I changed the locks. And not because I thought Kayla would break in, but because I needed to feel like something was still under my control. And that's when the real twist happened. I received an email from a lawyer. Subject line, notice of intent. It was from a firm I didn't recognize. The email stated that Kayla was seeking clarification regarding shared family assets and implied housing agreements. I had to read it 3 times to understand. She was threatening legal action over a house that wasn't hers, that she'd never lived in, based on promises other people made. I forwarded the email to Mark, then I forwarded it to my own lawyer. And that's when I realized this wasn't just family drama anymore. This was a line being crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. The lawyer called me the same afternoon. I'd expected something dramatic. Threats, demands, and illegal jargon meant to scare me. Instead, his voice was calm, almost bored, like this was just another Tuesday. He asked me a few basic questions. Was my name the only one on the deed? Yes. Did anyone contribute financially to the purchase or mortgage? No. Had I signed anything? Anything at all, suggesting shared ownership or tenancy? Absolutely not. Then he sighed and said, I'm going to be very direct with you. They don't have a case. I felt my shoulders drop for the first time in weeks. He explained that what Kayla's lawyer was leaning on was something called promissory estoppel, basically claiming that promises were made and relied upon. But those promises hadn't come from me. They'd come from my parents. And legally, that mattered. He told me not to respond directly to Kayla or her lawyer. He'd handle it. When I hung up, and I felt relieved, but also sick. Because even if this went nowhere legally, something had permanently broken. That evening, my mom called again. I didn't answer. She texted instead. Why are there lawyers involved? This has gone too far. The irony almost made me laugh. Mark encouraged me to send one final message. Clear, unemotional, firm. So I did. I wrote that I loved them, but any further communication about housing would go through my lawyer, that I needed space, that I hoped someday we could rebuild, but not like this. My mom didn't reply. My dad did. He said I'd humiliated the family, that I'd turned a private disagreement into something cold and transactional, that Kayla was devastated. 2 hours later, my aunt posted a long Facebook rant about how modern women forget the meaning of family and how money poisons love. I stopped checking social media after that. A few days passed quietly, too quietly. Then my lawyer called again. He said Kayla's attorney had withdrawn. I asked what that meant. He said, it usually means the client was either advised there's no case, or they didn't like hearing no. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt numb. That night, Mark and I went through our finances, changed passwords, updated wills, named each other explicitly as sole beneficiaries. It felt surreal, like we were preparing for a storm instead of a marriage. Then the secret came out, not from my parents, from my grandmother. She asked me to come over alone. She's in her late 70s, sharp as a tack, and never liked conflict. Mom, if she was calling me, it meant something serious. She made tea, sat me down, took my hands in hers. She asked if I knew why my parents were so desperate to secure a house for Kayla. I said I assumed guilt, fear, overprotectiveness. She shook her head. Then she told me something no one ever had. When my parents were first married, they bought a house using money borrowed from my grandmother, under the table, no paperwork. Years later, when Kayla was a teenager, they refinanced and quietly used the equity to pay off debts Kayla had accumulated under their names. Credit cards, a car loan, medical bills. They never told me. They'd sold that house shortly after and downsized, but the guilt stayed. In their minds, they'd sacrificed stability for Kayla once already. Now they were trying to do it again, through me. My grandmother squeezed my hands and said, they see your house as the universe correcting itself. I drove home in silence. Suddenly, everything made sense. The entitlement, the certainty, the way they'd spoken like it was already decided. They didn't see my house as mine. They saw it as family property they'd forgotten to claim. A week later, Kayla showed up again. This time, she didn't cry. She was calm, controlled, almost rehearsed. She said she just wanted closure. I told her she had 5 minutes. She admitted she'd overreacted, that the lawyer was a stress decision, that hormones had played a role. Then she said, but I still don't understand why you couldn't help me. I told her the truth. I told her I'd spent my entire life being the responsible one so she could be reckless. Now that I'd watched my parents drain themselves emotionally and financially for her, that I loved her, but I wouldn't sacrifice my marriage or my security to save her again. She stared at me for a long time. Then she said quietly, you think you're better than me? I said, no, I think I'm done being your backup plan. She left without another word. 2 days later, she posted an update online announcing she and Eric were moving out of state to start fresh, away from negativity. People praised her strength. No one asked why. My parents haven't spoken to me since. It's been almost 3 weeks now. Some days I grieve the family I thought I had. Other days I feel lighter than I ever have. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if standing my ground cost me more than it saved. But then I remember this house. The walls, the floors. The quiet, and I know one thing for sure. If I'd given it up, I would have lost myself. The internet got involved whether I wanted it to or not. I hadn't planned to post anything after writing my original AITA post. I honestly thought I'd read a few comments, maybe get a sanity check, and log off. But overnight, it exploded. When I woke up, my phone was overheating. Tens of thousands of upvotes. Awards I didn't know the names of. Hundreds of comments reminding me to drink water, lock my credit, change my passwords, install cameras. People dissected every sentence I'd written like it was evidence in a trial. And overwhelmingly, shockingly, they were on my side. Parentification. Golden child syndrome. Emotional blackmail. Promissory estoppel my ass. People shared stories eerily similar to mine. Sisters, brothers, and cousins who always needed saving. Parents who treated one child's stability as communal property. Comment after comment said some version of the same thing. If you give in now, you'll never stop paying. I cried reading them, not because they were harsh, but because they saw me so clearly. Someone suggested I post an update. I hesitated. Posting felt like pouring gasoline on a fire that was already burning. But something inside me wanted the record straight, not for revenge, for closure. So I wrote an update. I explained the lawyer situation, the threats, the entitlement. I didn't insult Kayla. I didn't name call my parents. I stuck to facts. And then something unexpected happened. Kayla found it. I know because she texted me screenshots of my post highlighted in yellow with messages stacked on top of each other. And how could you do this to me? You made me look insane. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I didn't reply. Instead, Eric messaged Mark. He apologized for everything. He said Kayla had read the comments obsessively, that she oscillated between rage and sobbing, that she felt betrayed by the internet. That was the phrase he used. Then he dropped the real bomb. He said Kayla hadn't told the full truth about their finances to anyone. They weren't just tight, they were drowning. Credit cards maxed, loans taken out in his name, missed payments. And worst of all, Kayla had assumed my parents would help indefinitely. And when that help stopped, she panicked. The pregnancy announcement hadn't just been about joy, it had been leverage. Eric said he was scared. Not of being a dad, but of being trapped in a cycle where every crisis became someone else's responsibility. A week later, they broke up. I found out through a mutual friend. Kayla moved back in with my parents. The irony didn't escape me. My parents finally reached out after that, not to apologize, to ask if I'd consider helping Kayla get back on her feet now that Eric was gone. I said no. I said it once. Calm, final. My dad accused me of abandoning my sister. I asked him who was actually taking responsibility now. He hung up. That was a month ago. Since then, life has shifted. Mark and I settled into routines that feel quiet and solid. Sunday grocery trips, cooking dinner together, planning a delayed honeymoon without guilt or interruption. But the peace came with grief. I grieved the version of my family that existed only in my head. The one where love wasn't conditional, where support didn't come with strings. One night, scrolling through my post again, I noticed something I'd missed before. A comment from someone older. They wrote, "You didn't break your family, you revealed it." That sentence stuck with me. Then something else happened. My mom showed up at my door, alone, no warning. She looked older than she had a month earlier. She asked if she could come in. I let her. She didn't sit right away, just stood in my living room, looking around like she was seeing it properly for the first time. She said, "I never realized how much pressure we put on you." I didn't respond. She admitted they'd leaned on me because I never failed. Because I always caught things before they fell apart. Because Kayla needed saving, and I didn't. She cried, quietly, not theatrically. She said Kayla was angry at everyone now. At them, at me, at the world. That living together again had been difficult. Then she asked if I'd forgive them. I told her forgiveness wasn't the same as access. She nodded, like she understood. When she left, she hugged me gently, like she was afraid I'd disappear. I don't know what happens next. Kayla hasn't spoken to me since moving back home. I hear she tells people I chose strangers over family. Maybe she believes that. But here's the truth I haven't said out loud until now. For the first time in my life, I'm not bracing for the next crisis. And that feels like freedom. The weeks after that were quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not peaceful exactly, just empty. No constant buzzing of my phone. No late night emergencies. No passive-aggressive messages wrapped in concern. For the first time since I could remember, my life wasn't being interrupted by someone else's chaos. And that's when the guilt finally showed up properly. It didn't come as panic or anxiety. It came as questions. Was Kayla okay? Was the baby okay? Had I gone too far by drawing such a hard line? I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about reaching out. More than once, I typed her name into my phone and just stared at it. But every time I imagined reopening that door, I remembered the lawyer email, the threats, the entitlement spoken out loud without shame. Mark noticed the shift in me before I said anything. One night, we were sitting on the couch, legs tangled together, TV on, but muted. He asked me if I missed them. I said yes. Then I surprised myself by saying something else. I said, and I miss who I was before I realized I was being used. That's when he understood. A few days later, my grandmother called again. She told me my parents were exhausted, that living with Kayla while she was pregnant had brought everything to the surface. The debt, the resentment, the years of avoidance. She didn't ask me to intervene. She just said, sometimes people have to feel the weight of their choices to put them down. Then came the final twist I didn't see coming. Kayla reached out, not with anger, not with accusations, with a single message. "I'm in therapy." I stared at it for a long time before replying. I wrote back, "I'm glad." Nothing more, nothing less. A week passed. Then another message. "I'm realizing I expected everyone to fix things for me." That one hurt in a different way. I didn't respond immediately. I talked it through with Mark, with my therapist. Yes, I started therapy too. Not because I was falling apart, but because I finally had the space to unpack things I'd normalized my entire life. When I did reply, I kept it simple. "I hope therapy helps you build something that's yours." She didn't reply after that, but she didn't lash out either. According to my mom, things started changing slowly after that. Kayla got a part-time job, started budgeting, stopped talking about my house entirely. The baby's father was involved again, cautiously, with boundaries in place. I didn't rush to reinsert myself, and for the first time, no one demanded that I do. 3 months after the wedding, my parents invited Mark and me to dinner. Neutral ground, restaurant, no assumptions. I agreed, with conditions. No talk about money, no talk about housing. No guilt tripping. To their credit, they respected it. Dinner was awkward, polite, fragile, but something important happened. When the check came, my dad reached for it, then paused. He looked at me and said, "We'll split it." It was a small thing, but it mattered. Later that night, my mom hugged me and said, "I'm trying to unlearn some things." I told her I was too. We're not fixed. I don't know if we ever will be, but the dynamic has shifted. Subtly, permanently. Kayla gave birth 2 weeks ago. I found out through a text from my mom. A photo followed. A tiny hand gripping a finger. I felt something warm in my chest. And something sad. I sent a gift. No name attached. Just practical things. Diapers. Clothes. A note that said, "Wishing you and the baby health." Kayla didn't respond. And that's okay. None, because here's the thing. No one tells you about boundaries. They don't guarantee reconciliation. They guarantee self-respect. Sometimes you don't get applause. You get distance. And distance is what allows people to finally grow on both sides. If I could go back to the night of my wedding, I still wouldn't change my answer. I wouldn't give up my house. I wouldn't sacrifice my marriage. I wouldn't shrink myself to keep the peace. Because love that only survives when one person gives everything isn't love. It's obligation. And I'm done living that way. A year has passed since my wedding. I didn't expect that sentence to feel heavy, but it does. Not because I regret anything, because so much changed in such a short time that it feels like I lived an entirely different life before that day. Mark and I are solid. Am I stronger than I imagined we'd be this early in a marriage? We learned, fast, what it meant to choose each other when outside pressure tried to bend us. We don't fight about my family anymore. We talk. We check in. We protect what we're building. The house feels different now, too. Not just walls and furniture, but a symbol. Of choosing myself. Of ending a pattern. My parents and I speak regularly now, carefully, with boundaries that still feel new and slightly awkward, like shoes that haven't been broken in yet. But they try. And I see the effort. They don't ask me to fix things anymore. That alone is progress. Kayla and I exist in the same world, but not the same orbit. We don't talk much. Sometimes we exchange brief, neutral messages about logistics or holidays. No accusations, no apologies either. I'm just distance that feels intentional rather than hostile. From what I hear, she's still in therapy. Still working. Still struggling. But in ways that are hers now. And that matters. I saw her once, briefly, at a family gathering. She held her baby, who had my mother's eyes and my father's nose. When our eyes met, there was no anger there. Just something tired. Thoughtful. She nodded at me. I nodded back. No words. Later that night, my aunt pulled me aside. The same aunt who'd posted that rant about money poisoning love. She said quietly, I didn't understand before. I do now. I thanked her and moved on. Because validation, I've learned, doesn't need to come from everyone to be real. Sometimes I think about the Reddit post, the strangers who saw what my own family couldn't at the time. The comments that named things I'd lived with but never had language for. I don't reread it often anymore, but when I do, I'm struck by how unsure I sounded. How much I needed permission to say no. I don't need that anymore. The biggest lesson I learned wasn't about property or money or even family. It was about roles. I was the reliable one, the steady one, the solution. And when I stopped playing that role, everyone panicked. Because the system depended on me staying exactly where I was. Breaking that system didn't make me cruel. It made me honest. I don't hate my sister. I don't resent my parents. I don't even regret how public everything became. Because sometimes the truth needs witnesses to survive the guilt that follows it. If you're reading this and you see yourself in it, the sibling who's always expected to give, bend, absorb, I want you to hear this clearly. You are allowed to say no without offering an alternative. You are allowed to protect what you built. You are allowed to disappoint people who benefited from your silence. Love doesn't require self-erasure, and family isn't proven by how much you sacrifice, but by how much they respect when you stop. So, for the last time, I'll ask the question that started all of this. Not because I need the answer anymore, but because it deserves to be asked clearly. Was I the asshole for refusing to give up my house? I don't think so, and finally, neither do I.